Hi everyone, well it's 1 p.m, so thank you very much for joining us today. We'll get underway with our DigiTalk presentation today. But firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Catherine Enright. I'm the Volunteer Manager with Sydney Harbour Federation Trust. And firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and owners of the lands and waters on which we all stand today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to our DigiTalk via the Harbour Trust digital platform. We're offering a series of these, so please be sure to check out our website at harbourtrust.gov.au for a series of great presentations, and we also have our archived presentations on the site as well. So before introducing the presentation, I'd just like to offer a couple of tips today to best enjoy the presentation. So Julie, our presenter, will share her screen with you today, and you can see the first slide now. Your microphones are all on mute, so nothing to worry about there. And you should also be able to see myself and Julie and another slide. If you'd like to reduce those video tiles so that you can see the full presentation, you can do so at the top of the top video tile and just reduce those to get those out of the way. If you have any technical issues throughout, please type your issue via the chat option at the bottom of your screen and we'll endeavour to help you. And Julie will be happy to answer some questions at the end of the presentation. So if you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen to type your question. Please keep it brief. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll do our best at the end of Julie's talk today. Now to our Trust Talk presentation. Today's presenter, Julie Evans. Julie retired in 2006 from a career as an English history teacher, a specialised support teacher for students with learning difficulties, and head of the Learning Support Department in a large independent boys' school. Julie's passion for both history and Sydney led her to volunteer with the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust as a speaker and as an interviewer with the Oral History program. After a few months of retirement, Julie joined the part-time staff in another boys' school supporting programs for students with learning needs. 12 years later, at the end of 2019, Julie did actually retire, but continues with her Harbour Trust volunteering. Now, today's presentation. Julie will paint a vivid picture of Harbour Trust visitor destinations, including North Head Sanctuary at Manly, Headland Park at Mosman, Cockatoo Island in Sydney Harbour, Sub Base Platypus at North Sydney, Woolwich Dock and Parkland, and Macquarie Lightstation at Vaucluse. You'll gain fascinating insights into convict life on Cockatoo Island, the role of North Fort's military fortifications during World War II, and how you can enjoy these sites today, which are now open to the public and free to enjoy. So now I will hand over to Julie. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. I was just trying to get rid of the tiles. I would like to acknowledge the custodians of the lands on which we are gathered in various places today, and to say that it's a pleasure to be able to share with you some of the exciting locations around Sydney Harbour. Some you may not know, some you may be quite familiar with. The Sydney Harbour Federation Trust sits within the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. It's a federal government agency, and it was set up in 1988 as the result of various lobby groups concerned that harbour lands, often ex-defence lands, might become sites for developers. So the trust was set up, and it is now an ongoing entity. At first, it was for a certain period of time, but as of this year, it's been extended and it is now ongoing. There are 10 harbour sites and more than 400 buildings that the Trust manages. So it is a huge responsibility. The Trust aims to rehabilitate these sites, protect the environment in which they sit, and make them welcoming places for Sydney-siders, Australian tourists and overseas visitors to enjoy. The trust is managed by a board, and on that board there are First Nation representatives, federal, state and local government representatives. It's a very important group because they welcome community input, and there are community consultation committees that are involved when a decision has to be made about one of the sites. There is another group that are closely involved with the Harbour Trust, and that's the group of volunteers, but I'm going to say more about them later. There are specialist staff, and they join with a group of about 60 Harbour Trust staff members through a whole range of activities, from those who manage the Harbour Trust to those who help with the architectural needs of these sites, those who look after the landscaping, environmental restrictions and needs, and of course the rangers. So very, very specialised roles, as well as the general running of a very busy organisation. The Harbour Trust does receive government funding, but much of their funding comes from the fact that once buildings are rehabilitated, brought back to a modern standard of workplace health and safety, they're leased out. And because of this, it means that the money that comes from the leasing of certain buildings can go into the rehabilitation of other buildings. They also get money from venue hire. There are weddings on Cockatoo Island. There are music festivals on Cockatoo Island. Other major activities, film launches, advertising campaigns on Cockatoo Island. So there is income coming in that way as well. Or you can go and stay on Cockatoo Island. Accommodation ranging from the campground to some very fancy accommodation in beautiful heritage houses. The Trust also enjoys the donations from the public, some from organisations, some from individuals. This is the annual report from 2018 to 2019, and you can read that for yourselves, but I'm just going to point out 3 different statistics that really impress me. First one is here, the number of visits, almost 1.9 million visitors in that 12 months. That's pretty astounding. The second statistic is that 90% of the trust land is open to the public. And the third one that I really like, the third statistic that I'm going to mention, is that there were over 29,000 volunteer hours. Now, let me say that as a volunteer and having contact with other volunteers, I know how passionate we all are about the work of the Harbour Trust. And those hours are given very willingly. Well, what's the vision of the Trust? What was the idea? Why set it up? What the Trust wants to do is to create extraordinary places that we can all enjoy. We have to admit that our harbour is something special. I've flown into other harbours in the world, but nothing beats flying over Sydney Harbour as you're coming home after being away and coming over our magnificent harbour and harbour bridge. I think second to none. So the mission of the Trust is to bring the heritage of the harbour and the sites that the Trust manages to us all. It's a lasting legacy for us, our children, our grandchildren. They want to conserve the sites, look after them environmentally, but also look after the buildings so that we can enjoy the adaptive reuse of the places in the care of the Trust. Throughout the presentation, there are several photos that are special to me, and this pair of photos is one of those instances. The man who's probably going on a bushwalk in his little hat and what looks like a coat, probably a tie, An old photograph, but if you look at the photo below, same tree and the same magnificent view that I was enjoying only a few days ago. Well, where are the trust sites? Let's have a look. Let's start at North Head. So North Head Sanctuary doesn't take up the entire North Head Peninsula. We share that land with Sydney Water, Federal Police, National Parks and Wildlife, the Old Manly Hospital site. So that's why North Head Sanctuary is right in the middle. If we come across to South Head, you'll see there's a little pink square. That's Macquarie Lightstation at Watson's Bay. And then there's a tiny, tiny little dot, which is the former Marine Biological Research Station. And I can hear you saying, what's that? Well, you're going to find out soon enough. Then we go across to Middle Head, and we have 3 sites coming under the heading of Headland Park. And those 3 sites are Middle Head, Georges Heights, and Chowder Bay. Further along, further up the harbour, we come to Sub Base Platypus at Neutral Bay, gasworks and submarine base in its history. Further, we go to the end of the Hunters Hill Peninsula, and we have in the pale blue Woolwich Dock and Parklands. And then the 2 islands that the Trust is responsible for. Cockatoo Island, and I have to say this is my favourite site, and I will explain why that is later. And then there's a tiny, tiny little dot, which is Snapper Island. Now, Snapper has not formally been transferred from the Department of Finance to the Harbour Trust, but that is fully expected to occur. These are sites that we can all enjoy, from the youngest of children who adore Cockatoo Island, who love, as in that middle photograph, going up into that Macquarie Lightstation. There's a lot of joy on that child's face. I'm not sure if you can see it. But the sites are magnificent scenically as well as historically and through their heritage. I'm going to look at each one of the sites in turn, tell you a little bit about their history and a little bit about what's happening there now. So this is Woolwich Dock and Parklands. You'll see Gladesville Bridge in the background, and Woolwich Dock is towards the end of the Hunters Hill Peninsula. You can see the dock itself, and you can see on the right, that's the goat paddock there, and to the left, slightly under the white flash, is the horse paddock. This area here, that was the working part of Woolwich Dock, and the wonderful thing is that it's become that again. This is at the junction of the Parramatta and the Lane Cove rivers, and you can see from the top photograph that it's a very green area. This main area here that I'm circling with the cursor, that's Clark's Point, and that comes under the auspices of Hunters Hill and the Hunters Hill Council. So the Harbour Trust is around that. Horse paddock here, round to the goat paddock there, and Woolwich Dock here. The dock's about 300 metres in length, and it's carved out of the magnificent sandstone cliff. It was originally a boat building and maintenance facility, and as I said, that's what it is again. Look at that bottom photograph and you'll see a number of vessels, modern vessels, in the dock. This is in fact now the home of Nicorette and Wild Oats 11, and it's been from this location that these boats have been prepared for the Sydney to Hobart. But let's go back. I'm going to just return to one slide to point out to you, see this area here at the top of the top slide, that's Kelly's Bush. Now you might remember that from the 70s. There were plans to develop that area, and the Builders Labourers Federation put green bands, the first green bands on that area. And so Kelly's Bush is now still available for us to enjoy. The Aboriginal people use the area. If you go to Kelly's Bush, you can see evidence of shell middens, and you can understand why the Aboriginal people would live there, live close by, because of the proximity of the water. In 1835, the Clark family were granted land, and they built a home there. And that home is there in the bottom photograph. In the late 1800s, Atlas Engineering took over the site. You can see on the building, there's a big sign for Atlas Engineering. And from that point, it became a shipbuilding area. The dock was constructed, and it remained shipbuilding and maintenance for many years. In 1963, the Army purchased the site, and it was from here that vessels went to Vietnam carrying vehicles and supplies during the Vietnam War. In 1997, the Army vacated the land. They moved to a more strategic location, and the Transport Division of the Army went to Townsville. The site was closed. So it lay neglected for quite some time, and then in 1999, the Harbour Trust took over the management and opened the site to the public. Now in the top photograph, you can see a couple of things worthy of note. There's a ship, that's the Neophils, and it's coming into the dock, and you can see a strange structure across the opening of the dock. That's the caisson, or the gate, and that's put across the dock, and then it fits very, very tightly, and the dock can then be drained so that once the vessel is inside, the dock can become a dry dock. So it can be both wet dock and a dry dock. That's not possible now. The caisson is derelict, and it is simply a wet dock. Now we're going to go to Snapper Island. Now, a couple of things you might recognise on this slide. That brown brick building, that's the old Dunlop factory, and that is now Birkenhead Shopping Centre. Snapper Island is a tiny little island, but quite a big history. It's the smallest island in the harbour. And as you can see, there's not much island left. It has a great collection of tin and timber buildings. There's a slipway, there are jetties, and the buildings were constructed to resemble a ship, so that there wasn't a kitchen, there's a galley, there wasn't a cafeteria, there was a mess. The offices area was known as the bridge, so it had all the terminology from a ship. In 1879, it was a public recreation reserve, and if you had a boat, you could go to visit the island and just simply enjoy it for its natural beauty. During World War I, when Cockatoo Island was particularly busy, they needed more storage space, and Spectacle Island belonged to the Navy, so Snapper Island became the storage for Cockatoo Island, and it never ever went back to public reserve, but we hope that in the future it will be open to the public once again. In 1931, the Naval Cadet Training Depot, Sydney, was established. And in 1932, the Navy League made their headquarters there. And you can see from these photographs, which are both undated, unfortunately, but you can see the purpose to which that island was put. Yet to be officially transferred, but we do hope that that will happen in the near future. We're going to go to another part of Sydney now, and we're going to go to North Head Sanctuary. Now, the buildings that you can see on your screen, they made up the School of Artillery. Now we've changed the name because it is going to be known for always now as the North Head Sanctuary. You can see the large number of buildings. Each one of these buildings is a trust responsibility. Many of them have been renovated and rehabilitated. You can see the parade ground in the middle. Since this photo was taken, some extra trees have been planted around the edges of the parade ground, but it will always remain the parade ground. This area here, where the cursor is, that's the gatehouse. Beautiful Art Deco building that has also been restored. This area here was the officers' mess, the officers' quarters, and this area here, the sergeant's mess. There's also a gym, garages for vehicles, and up here, area for vehicles and for weaponry that needed to be stored and located away. This building here that I call the H building, it has a number of classrooms and offices, and the bar across the middle, 2 levels. One level is a cafeteria and one level it was a ballroom. And I've given presentations along the northern beaches, and some of the women at those presentations have said, oh, I made my debut at a ball, the Mayor's Ball, held in the ballroom at School of Artillery. So there are lots of people who have wonderful memories of North Head in those days. North Head has great significance for the Aboriginal people, and there are Aboriginal rock engravings. There's evidence of campsites, of burials, and of shell middens, but none of these features are for general public knowledge in order to protect them. The traditional owners of the land are the Gayamagal people. When it was the School of Artillery as a military site, those fortifications were first built in 1934. And North Fort was a major World War II defence installation, and the School of Artillery trained thousands of soldiers. We see the soldiers in the middle photograph, and in the photo on the right, you might wonder, what are those women doing lying on the table? These women were working in the plotting room. During World War II, my mother-in-law belonged to the Australian Women's Army Service, and part of her service was in the plotting room at North Head. And because I can't see the face of that woman lying on the table, I like to think it might be Pat doing her bit for her country. What a wonderful photo that is on the left. The beautiful sandstone cliffs with the sun on them. There's a picture of the gatehouse that I mentioned to you before. An easier way of seeing its Art Deco features. Throughout North Head, there are walking tracks. Good, sturdy, safe walking tracks, and they are extremely popular with walkers in the local area, but also with walkers who visit from overseas. the area has unique flora and fauna. Over 140 different species of flora, perhaps more than 90 birds visit the area. And that bottom photograph that you can see is the Hanging Swamp, a beautiful wetland area which is home to many different birds. North Fort played a major role during World War II. There were gun emplacements, and there are many underground tunnels which you can access if you wish by taking a tour from North Head. On the left, you can see a memorial with some people looking at the view, and this is the memorial to the defence of Sydney. And it marks the opening of the entrance to the Memorial Walk. And if you look, you can see along the pathway, a little hard to detect, I guess, there are pavers, and you can buy a paver to honour an individual, an army unit, or a specific group who made a contribution to the many conflicts in which Australia has been involved. And that walk takes you through the bush, and at different intervals along that walk, there are memorials to the different conflicts in which Australia has been involved. There are volunteers restoring the different heritage of the site, and that middle photograph shows you a scene from in the tunnels, and the volunteers are restoring old switchboards, power boards, so that when we go down into those tunnels, we get a real feel for what they would have been like at the time. As part of North Head, I mentioned before that we share North Head with National Parks and Wildlife, and National Parks and Wildlife manage the quarantine station. So we don't have anything to do with the quarantine station per se, but on Trust land is the unique third quarantine cemetery. So one of the cemeteries used when the quarantine station was operating. It contains the graves of locals, of immigrants, of soldiers, those who died at the quarantine station, perhaps due to smallpox or plague, or during the influenza outbreak of 1918. The young woman whose photo you can see is Annie Egan. She was a 27-year-old nurse from Gunnedah, and she volunteered to come look after the soldiers, from 1,000 soldiers from one ship, the Medic, which was returning from World War I. As you can guess, Annie Egan caught the influenza. She gave her life so that she could look after the soldiers, but she died as a result of that. Her grave is in that third quarantine cemetery, and it bears the inscription, "A life sacrificed to duty." We'll leave that sad note for the moment, and we'll go to Headland Park on Middle Head. How's that for a view? 3 different sites here: Georges Heights, Middle Head, and Chowder Bay. And that's as you are moving down the peninsula. This is the traditional land of the Borragagal people. In 1815, in recognition of the displacement of Aboriginal people, Governor Macquarie set up a farm experiment, and he put in charge of that farm experiment an Aboriginal elder known to his people as Bungaree. We can see his picture on our screens at the moment. The farm experiment was not a success, and I think Macquarie actually tried it twice, but that wasn't something that was going to be successful. From 1870, on that Middle Head Peninsula, there were 40 fortifications. And if you go down again on National Parks and Wildlife Land at the very end, you can see Queen Victoria's insignia in the wall of some of the gun emplacements. So that tells us just how old these remnants are. We have remnants on Middle Head from 1870s and from World War I and later. There are gun batteries, there are buildings, there are barracks. You can see the photograph of the Women's Army Corps. They were based at Georges Heights. In World War I, there was a military hospital at Georges Heights, and I'll show you a couple of photos in a little while about that period of its history. The bottom photograph shows you the submarine miners depot, and this was down at Chowder Bay. The submarine miners laid cables with mines across the harbour. A very dangerous operation, and there was a very serious accident at one time, and some of those miners were killed. So such a variety of activities on Middle Head. From 2002, the military gradually withdrew altogether. Remnants still remain though, including the World War I hospital buildings and training facilities. And if you look, you'll see there's a very important first aid lesson going on there, with the skeleton and the man all bandaged up. And the middle photograph shows you one of the wards. Now I want you to remember that photograph, because I'm going to show you later what one of those wards looks like today. The photograph on the right, that's Chowder Bay again, and that's the submarine miners. But look in the background, that's Clifton Gardens Beach. The multi-storey building, that's Clifton Gardens Hotel, and the long, low building, that's the Clifton Gardens Dance Pavilion. Both of those sadly gone, but forever preserved in that wonderful photograph. Middle Head, which is down the hill from Georges Heights, was the Australian School of Pacific Education from 1947 to 1997. And it was here that young men and women came from the Pacific Islands to be trained as teachers, field officers, in administrative duties, because Australia was supporting their growth to independence. I have a friend who did his teacher training there at ASOPA, as it was known, and then went off to New Guinea with his wife to teach. All the buildings that remain have been refurbished, and they are now fully leased out, and different businesses run their business from these rehabilitated offices. There's a tennis court there, there are barbecues, there's a cafe, and there's lots of public space that you can enjoy. And there's plenty of parking. We're going to another part of Sydney now. We're going to South Head. And this is another one of the photos I said that, you know, I had favourites. This is Macquarie Lightstation in Watson's Bay. The site of Macquarie Lightstation is the homeland of the Birra people. And do you know there's been a signal point on that spot, that point, since 1790. Now, at first, it would have been signal fires, but it would have meant that any ships entering the harbour would have seen that point as the end of their travels and that they were reaching their destination. So it's always had two purposes: communicate news to the colony that there was a ship coming in, but also to guide the ships safely into the harbour. And I'm sure we've all heard of the wreck of the Dunbar. So there have been tragedies which have occurred in this area, and Macquarie Lighthouse has served its people very well for many years. In 1818, Macquarie Lighthouse was built. Francis Greenway designed it, and he was granted a partial pardon for his work on this lighthouse. He was granted his full pardon with the building of the Hyde Park Barracks in Macquarie Street. Robert Watson, who gives his name to Watson's Bay, was the first lighthouse keeper. Now, Francis Greenway wasn't very happy about the sandstone that had been used, and that led to the very strange photograph with two lighthouses. The sandstone started to crumble, so James Barnett designed a replacement, and that was built. From 1933, that became an electric operation, but still needing to be checked on and still needing a lighthouse keeper. 1976, fully automatic. Today, it still operates as a navigational aid, and if you're interested, you can climb to the top of that lighthouse. There's only 200 steps. There are guided tours every 2 months, and believe me, it's well worth the effort for the stunning views of Sydney and the coastline. Now, this is the site that I thought you may never have heard of, and I have to say that I'd never heard of it until I joined the Trust. And this is the former Marine Biological Research Station. It is located within the homeland of the Birrabirragaigal people as well. And what happened was that in 1878, Nikolai Macleay arrived in Sydney, and he had persuaded the New South Wales government and the scientific community to open a research station in Sydney. He believed that this was the perfect place for a marine biological research station. Its isolation, its wide range of very different creatures that could be examined. In 1881, the research station was completed, but sadly, it only operated for 5 years before Nikolai died, and there was no one to take it over. The army stepped in, and it was acquired for military purposes. For most of the 100 years, it was married officer quarters, but during World War II, it had another purpose. Now, this is it here in the long photograph. I'm just circling it there with my cursor. It was used during World War II as accommodation for the women of the Australian Women's Army Service who were working or training on South Head. And once again, it was my mother-in-law who told me about the fact that when it was their day off, they were allowed to go swimming in Camp Cove. Beautiful spot. But the army was concerned that there could be sharks. So they stationed a young soldier on the point with a weapon to watch for sharks. Now, my mother-in-law tells me that that young man tended to look far more often into Camp Cove than he did out to sea. We've moved now to Neutral Bay, and this is Sub Base Platypus. Very large area, right on the water, just recently reopened to the public. You can see, I'm going to point out a few things here because it's a great photo for that. If you look over here on the far left, you'll see that's High Street Wharf, Ferry Wharf, and this is Kesterton Park. And that's a lovely park, there's a playground for kids, but the Trust has built a walkway which goes from Kesterton Park here, and it joins the wharf at Sub Base Platypus, so that you can get there now by public transport. All these buildings were involved in Sub Base Platypus, and this area down here has been turned into a lovely grassy area. There's a kids' playground, and it gives the opportunity for people to come there for picnics. It's hard to credit that it's so close to the city, but when you see a photo like this, you realise just how near we are from this beautiful tranquility to the bustling city. This site is located within Camaragal country, and of course that whole area would have been used extensively by the original inhabitants. From 1876 until the 1930s, the site was used as a gasworks. And I'm just going to take you back. See these many buildings here? That's the Aora development, but that's where the gas tanks were originally. So they're long gone, and now there are unit blocks there. So it was a gasworks until the 1930s. In 1942, the Commonwealth Government took over the site, and they established the Royal Australian Navy Torpedo Maintenance Establishment during the war. And this was for the manufacture of torpedoes for the war effort. In 1967, it went on to have another life, and it was officially commissioned as the submarine base, HMAS Platypus. And it greeted the first of our 6 Royal Australian Navy submarines in 1967. The site closed in 1999, and you might recall that the submarines went to Western Australia, probably a more strategic location for defence than Neutral Bay. It was transferred to the Harbour Trust in 2005, but it took a long time for the major remediation project to take place to address the remnants of contamination that were left because of its history as a gasworks and as a naval base. But now it's a community space. In time, there will be cafes, restaurants, there will be community spaces for groups to meet, and there will be places simply for the local people or visitors to enjoy the harbour. It's now a waterfront urban park. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And there are leasing opportunities as well. Businesses may choose to run their business from the site, and that would mean that they were very handy for the city. This shows you a very clear picture of the walkway that's been built between the Platypus Wharf and Kesterton Park, which leads to the High Street Ferry Wharf. That photograph at the top, that's fascinating. It's part of a kid's playground, and I don't know if you can read them, but all those little stepping stones have the phonetic alphabet on it. You know, A for Alpha, B for Bravo, X for X-ray, J for Juliet, and all of those, that phonetic alphabet is all written on each one of these little stepping stones. Now we come to Cockatoo Island, and I did warn you that this was my favourite site, and I also said I'd tell you why. Well, in 1855, my great-great-great-grandfather came to Cockatoo Island. Now, he didn't go as willingly as I go to visit. He was sent there as a second offender convict. And I think this has led me to the passion I have for the island, because I'm in the buildings where he was. I'm in the barracks where he slept. I'm in the mess hall where he ate. I'm in the areas where he walked. And I don't know if you're a family history fanatic like I am, but I find that very exciting. Cockatoo Island is located at the point of joining of the rivers, and therefore it has a number of connections to various indigenous tribes. And they would have used the island for fishing and hunting. They would have used the waters around the island for fishing. And of course, it was the women who fished from the boats. And this is a sketch that I really love, because if you look carefully in the bow of the boat, you'll see the baby, some very fat little arms or legs waving about. And of course, the mother who is fishing would have had to look after the children as well. What they'd do, they'd fish, and then often they would cook the fish in their canoe. They'd put a layer of sand down in the base of the canoe, and they could cook their fish there. Seems extraordinary, doesn't it? So after the indigenous use of the island became a convict jail. But over time, it's been a training school for boys, industrial school for girls, a shipyard, a submarine refit base, the place where an aeroplane was built. And now it's somewhere that we can go. Over 300,000 people visit annually. They might go to a festival or some special event like the one you can see on your screen, or they might simply go because they want to admire the harbour and explore Sydney's history. The convict period started in 1839, and a number of convicts were brought from Norfolk Island. They were fairly hardened men on Norfolk Island, so fairly hardened men on Cockatoo Island. Governor Gipps, governor at the time, had a very detailed idea. He was afraid that Australia may at some time suffer, as they had done in an earlier period, from a lack of food. And you remember that if the Second Fleet hadn't arrived when it did, the colony may well have starved. So Governor Gipps brought the convicts to Cockatoo Island, and one of their jobs was to dig grain silos. And that's what you're looking at now. These silos were dug into the sandstone. If you look at the picture on the left, or the sketch on the left, a hole was dug at the top, about a metre square, I guess, or a little less. And then the convicts would simply dig down, chiseling away at the sandstone. The structures are about 6 metres wide and a bit over 5 metres high. And you can see the inside of one in the photograph on the right. Now, we're lucky that we can actually see that, because they're not open at all. And this one is only visible because in 1942, a huge turbine shed was built on Cockatoo Island. And in order to get the space for that, part of the cliff had to be dynamited away. And in doing that dynamiting, the remnants of 3 of these silos were revealed. Some were destroyed, but you can see the main one here in the center. And then if you look to the right, you can see there's another little hollow And that's another part of a silo which has almost completely been destroyed. These silos cut by hand, the men would drop down from above. If their guards did not consider that they had done enough, they might well be left overnight. Whether they were given a light or not, I don't know. Whether they were given food or not, I don't know, but it would not have been a very comfortable way to spend the night. The grain was eventually put into the silos and it was going to be used as Governor Gipps had intended. And then the free traders of England found out what was going on and felt that this was a bit of a threat to their grain sales. And Governor Gipps was ordered to empty the silos. Cockatoo Island is well known for its convict harshness. That's the word, I'm looking for a better one. Very harsh conditions. And this slide with the photograph shows you the convict punishment cells. The photograph that I'm circling now, when I first joined the trust, there was a roadway that went from this side over here, right across here, and continued on up the hill. But the trust always knew that under that roadway, there were punishment cells. And 2009, they started to do some excavation. And what they found was this structure. This central doorway leads to two solitary confinement cells, one behind the other. They're very dark, they'd probably be very damp, and I dare say they'd be very cold. The openings to each side were used as storerooms for food, for coal. And I always love to look at the stairs that lead up. And you can see the way each of the steps is hollowed out from the constant footsteps, and possibly also from dragging heavy bags of supplies up to the convict precinct. Now, this building under which the punishment cells fit is the convict barracks, and directly above is the convict kitchen. So here's another picture that you can see to the right. You can get an impression of that convict kitchen. There were other isolation cells on the island. If you look at the bottom picture, there's an arrow which is indicating some isolation cells on the other side of the island. And these isolation cells, unfortunately or fortunately, were destroyed when excavation and, again, dynamiting of the cliff walls was done in order to build the Sutherland Dock. All the buildings from the convict era have been added to the UNESCO World Heritage List, and that happened in 2010. They are part of 11 convict sites throughout Australia as best surviving examples of convict transportation and colonial expansion through convict labour. So there are sites in Tasmania, Western Australia, Norfolk Island, as you would expect, wherever the convict settlements were first made. I like this slide because it shows us a modern day photograph of the mess hall where the convicts would have eaten their meals. A few modern additions with the windows, but basically the same structure. And if you look down below, there's a contemporary sketch of that same building. The man featured is Frederick Ward. Now, I'm wondering if any of you can give him another name, because he is in fact Captain Thunderbolt. And Frederick Ward is the only convict who is credited with being able to escape from Cockatoo Island. He needed the help of his common law wife, Mary Ann Biggs, and he was able to escape because she had a horse waiting for him on the other side, and she was able to help him ride off into the sunset. 3 other photographs showing Fitzroy Dock and showing the man who was the supervisor for the building of the Fitzroy Dock, Gotha Kerman. He was the superintendent of the island. The island was also an industrial school and reformatory for girls, which opened in 1871 when the convicts had been gone for a couple of years. And they called the island Biloela then, so that it didn't quite have that sound of Cockatoo Island and the connection to the convicts. It housed orphan girls alongside those convicted of crimes. The girls were not treated very well. There was a training school for boys. It was based on the island, but the boys lived and slept on the ship that you can see in the background. They were given military training, and they were also trained in things like ship skills, all sorts of nautical skills, tailoring, shoemaking, skills that would perhaps get them a trade once they were 18 and left the ship. Mostly they were orphans. Many of them were classed as uncontrollable boys. One of them is the young man pictured, Bernard Kieran. He used to swim in the docks. And the reason he did that is because he was a famous swimmer, not that we know him so well, but he held all the world records for his age group before he died very early at the age of 19. And he's the only Another dock was built in 1890 under the original supervision of Louis Samuel. And I love to be able to see inside this dock the way you've got the stepped sides, so that when it's a dry dock, you have the access to all parts of the ship and easy access to the base of the dock. In 1888, the island reverted to a jail once again, because Darlinghurst Jail was overcrowded, Long Bay Jail was not yet built, and for a period of time, there were prisoners, just your everyday prisoner, like these 2 men who were housed on Cockatoo Island. In 1913, Cockatoo Island became the Commonwealth Naval Dockyard, and this photograph from the height of World War II shows you that it was a major centre for wartime repairs. Singapore had fallen, and if you look at every dock, every wharf, every slipway, you'll see that there is a vessel in for repair or maintenance. It was an industrial powerhouse. I mentioned that it was the place for the refit of submarines, and you can see that that photograph on the left shows a submarine in one of the docks. It was also the place where Sir Charles Kingsford Smith and a consortium built a plane they called the Kodoc, and it was going to be a plane for a New Zealand route. But, bad pun, it didn't really get off the ground, and that business did not continue. The last vessel built on Cockatoo Island was the HMAS Success, and there's a photograph of the launch of Success. That was in 1983. 1991, the island closed. Now, we're coming back to the modern day. The Harbour Trust has done an amazing job. If you look at the photos on the left, that's what we've got today. The photos on the right, the sites from which the Trust has transformed them. And remember, I asked you to remember that ward during the World War I hospital? Look down the bottom left. That's an office for the Harbour Trust. That's their head office. And if you look closely between the 2 photos at the bottom, you can see that there we are in one of the hospital wards. Other sites, North Head Sanctuary, we have that power board, the switchboard. You can see what it did look like in the top left photograph, and then what it now looks like after the volunteers have worked to restore it. Cockatoo Island, one area, very messy, all tidied up, new surfacing, a marina built, extremely usable now. This is the point. We want to make the sites usable and enjoyable. And then the bottom two photos on the left, Chowder Bay, that little storage, the magazine storage for ordnance, that's now a cafe. And I think you can fit 2 people in it at a time. But tables outside to get your coffee and enjoy the sun. So how can you visit these sites? All the sites are accessible, they're open every day, and they're free. You can come by boat or car or ferry, you can ride your bike, you can walk. There's a visitor centre at Cockatoo Island and at North Head. So if you visit, do call in and the knowledgeable visitors will be able to give you information on where to go and what to see. There are regular and group guided tours of historic fortifications and significant sites. And you'll see there a photograph of the view from the top of Macquarie Lightstation. If you want to stay in a bit of luxury, how about that for a view? That bottom photograph out the back of one of the accommodation spots on Cockatoo Island. I wouldn't mind sitting there having a drink, watching the harbour. Now we come to what I think is a really important slide, the Harbour Trust volunteer team. And maybe you'd like to join and become a volunteer. There are guides who do tour guiding, heritage restoration. There's an oral history project where we need interviewers. There are visitor services. People help with special events. We have a speaker team and other things, limited only by your imagination, I think. And then maybe you too could have one of those beautiful blue t-shirts. If by chance you lived or worked on a Harbour Trust site, please get in touch with us because we are always looking for interviewees for the oral history project and we'd love to hear your story. If you are part of an institution or if you as an individual would like to donate and help, then again, please contact the Harbour Trust and you can certainly help us by spreading the word, by visiting and by letting people know what wonderful sites we have in our own backyard. If you're interested, sign up to our e-newsletters. There are 2, harbourtrust.gov.au and the specific Cockatoo Island website. You can follow us on Instagram or on Facebook, and there are a couple of recent posts on Facebook about the mother-in-law that I mentioned just a little while ago in her hard hat, and that's quite an interesting item as well. I do hope that you've enjoyed my presentation. It's very different to not seeing your faces, but I hope I've been able to give you an indication of the passion with which the volunteers and the Harbour Trust, the passion we have for the Harbour Trust. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Julie. That was a fascinating presentation and I hope everybody learnt a little bit more about our Harbour Trust sites. Now we have time for only a couple of questions. One of them is it difficult to get to Cockatoo Island?
Well, not really. You just need to look at your ferry timetables. You can get the ferry from Circular Quay, and that might be via a river cat or just a normal ferry. Or if you live on the north side, you could catch one of the ferries from Woolwich, Greenwich, Rydalmere, Meadowbank. You can catch a ferry from Balmain, Birchgrove. It's easy, but by ferry.
Okay, thank you, Julie. And another question is, when are the tours available again? Now, Julie, if you don't mind, I might answer this for you. As you probably know, with most institutions, our tours have been closed down for a little while because of COVID, but please keep an eye on our website. And if you haven't already subscribed to the Harbour Trust newsletter, please do that. And we'll be able to tell you when we will be recommencing tours. And as Julie mentioned, that includes things like the lighthouse, the tunnels at North Fort, things that you actually can't access unless you're on a tour. So we'll be very pleased to recommence those tours in the coming days. And we've got some very positive comments there today from everyone, so thank you very much. And actually that's about all we have time for in terms of questions today. So I wanted to say thank you so much, Julie, for giving that fantastic presentation. Really appreciate it. And I hope everyone learned something new. And I would like also just to let you know that when we finish the presentation now in 30 seconds or so, when we end, you'll see a link to a survey on your screen. And we'd really appreciate feedback on the presentation. It helps us to improve as we go along, and it will just take you a couple of minutes. So if you'd like to do that when we finish, that would be great. And also, we've got another presentation coming up next month. So again, if you'd like to keep up to date with our presentations, please check the website, harbourtrust.gov.au. And also, as I say, sign up for our newsletter at the website as well, and you won't miss out on any information. So thank you so much, Julie, for your presentation today. Thank you everyone for coming, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.